WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. Creating a Developer Culture of Accessibility with speaker Mark Steadman, Director of Accessibility Engineering at Fidelity Investments. This presentation was recorded October 2024.
Welcome to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024. If you've just joined, my name is Pete Chaneri and I'm a UX and accessibility designer. And thank you for joining us for the next session, which is creating a developer culture of accessibility with Jessie Frio. I hope I pronounced it correctly, Jessie, and Mark Steadman. Jessie is an accessibility engineer at Fidelity Investments with experience in accessible development and consultation with both web and mobile teams. Her passion is to ensure that all users can independently access all digital content through exceptional user experience. And that Mark Steadman is the Director of Accessibility Engineering at Fidelity Investments with a passion for accessibility automation, developer advocacy for accessibility, and an overall mission to make all content on the web and mobile accessible for all. Mark's main focus has been working with development teams to prioritize accessibility in continuous development and continuous integration environments and creating automated accessibility solutions for development teams and organizations. Now, I know I always say this, but I am, once again, really looking forward to this because it's so important to create a culture where everyone is invested in accessibility. So over to you, Jessie and Mark, and thank you so much for being here.
There we go. Awesome. All right. Well, like I always say, with any talk that's 24 hours talk, I have to say, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the entire world, welcome. For Jessie and myself, we're in the good old United States, and it is 5 a.m. for me and 6 a.m. for Jessie. So we are probably hyped up on coffee and way too much caffeine. So if we go through this in 15 minutes, that's probably why. But welcome everybody to creating a developer culture of accessibility. Again, we already had it. We already had a dope intro, so we should probably just do it really simple, Jesse, as we go through. So just real quick, I'm Mark Steadman, Director of Accessibility Engineering. I'm with Fidelity Investments.
I'm Jessie, and I am also with Fidelity Investments.
Yeah, you don't need to know anymore. We already had the dope intro for us, so we're just leaving it at that.
Pika took everything I was gonna say.
Yep, so easy peasy. So let's talk through today's agenda because it's really important to understand where we're going to start and where we're going to go as we go through this entire presentation. So our agenda today is talk through what culture is. We have to get an understanding for what it is before we can start kind of going through how to make a culture switch from a one that doesn't include accessibility to one that does. The overall problem, the ultimate goal, and how do we get to that ultimate goal, the way to get there and the way to actually get us to a culture that is accessible. But starting out, we have to start like we're in high school again. We have to do an introduction for what is culture. So Jessie, I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, so we didn't want to talk about creating a culture of accessibility without defining culture. Culture is a little bit of an ambiguous term. Everyone's heard it, but I doubt anyone has ever tried to define it. So we took a stab at it. So broadly, culture is the complex set of beliefs, values, behaviors, and practices that define a group of people or society. It influences who we are and what we do, the way we make decisions and rationalize our behaviors. And it's important, especially for our talk, to note that it's always changing. It's not something that's set in stone or that we're ever stuck with. And then to get more specific, the culture of an organization, or for our purposes, a development team, is a set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterize the group. So here, culture has a hand in defining the team's values and purpose, in setting the team's expectations, and in defining core values.
Right on. And so now that we have an awesome definition, two definitions of culture, we have to get to dive into the juicy stuff, which is what is the overall problem? Obviously, we're here because we have a problem to talk about, right? But there is a big problem in general with trying to switch a culture from accessibility is too difficult to we build content accessibly. Now, some of you on here have probably heard development teams say to you, we build content accessibly. We do. Do they really? Do you need to handhold them to get them to that point? Right? So we have to remember that doing this and getting culture shifted from the it's too hard to we do content accessibly is a long process. But what is the problem right now in getting there? So let's start with development teams. We know the stigma. Accessibility causes friction and it slows everything down, right? It's too difficult. That's the number one thing. Hey, you're coming in here, you're telling me how to do my processes. You're telling me I have to change all this stuff up. I've got to do audits. I've got to do this. I've got to get to these things. I got to do automation. I can't keep up, right? And there's some truth to that, honestly. Like, hi, I'm a person that was on a development team and was that exact same person who said, this is too difficult. You're going to make me do all this stuff. I can't do all this, right? But in reality, we all know that's not the case. We can easily fit into processes and do that. But that's the problem right now is that the stigma out there is that it's too difficult. The other one is business priorities. Think about it like this. It's always, everyone always tends to think that the business priority is that something new comes in, accessibly gets pushed aside. Actually, most organizations, most development teams, honestly, they do want to do good. But the problem is they see that good as not a necessary business value. They see it as a nice to have, right? If we can get to it, we'll get to it, right? But it's a nice to have. And the last one is moving goalposts. Kind of back to the first part about accessibility is too difficult. When you say moving goalposts, we're moving the target to say over and over again, yeah, it's accessible, but you forgot about this. You forgot about this, right? And accessibility teams constantly think that the target is moving, when in reality, it's probably just an accessibility advocate like myself or Jessie saying like, hey, you're almost there. We just need to do a couple more things. But to them, not knowing accessibility, they see it as it's never ending. That goalpost is moving. And are we ever going to get there, right? So everybody listening to me talk right now has probably heard developers, development teams, whether it's through a CMS, straight development like React, Angular, whoever it is, you've probably already heard all these things be said. However, I'm going to flip something the other way around as well, because it isn't just development teams that are the problem. Hi, accessibility teams are the problem too. Yes, accessibility advocates like me, like Jessie, like everybody probably listening to this call, we do have an issue in this process too. The stigma for accessibility teams normally is this is how we have to do it, right? The old school way of audits. I got to audit it, I got to send it to teams and they got to fix it, right? I need to make a blanket way for teams to adopt something and that's how we have to do it, right? It's not wrong. It's the way we've been doing it for years. A lot of organizations scale it in that way. Development teams pick it up in that way, right? But really the problem comes into there's no adaptation to development team processes, right? If you take away anything from this, if you're not a developer, not familiar with development processes, you have to understand development teams have a load of things that they do every single day, from straight development, code reviews, security reviews, test reviews, UI testings, all the pieces that go into it. There are a ton of processes, and just saying, hey, go do accessibility is going to make them resistant to it immediately, unless we look at it and figure out how we can fit it in nicely. There's no guidance that's easily consumable. When we say guidance, there's no guidance into implementation for some of the tools. There's not really a good plethora of guidance into how to fix some of the issues on their own, right? A lot of them are relatively simple, but like on their own, fixing some of the issues. There's no enforcement at development level. We'll get into this one a little bit more before I kind of go on to a deep dive about this, but having an enforcement as an accessibility team is saying, hey, we want to enforce accessibility at a development level and ensure that developers are fixing issues before they're released, not after, not waiting for a audit, right? We want to make sure they're fixed before that at a development level, but we don't do that right now. And the last one is throwing everything all at once. Now, sometimes this is the last bullet I had on here because it is what it is. Sometimes we're starting programs where we're working with development teams and we're under such pressure to get accessibility involved. We throw everything at them all at once and say, hey, we got to get this stuff done, right? But does it last? Does it make a culture of developing stuff accessibly? It doesn't. It might stick for a little bit, but it doesn't stick in the long term, right? So those are our two big problems. We have development teams that holistically think that accessibility is too difficult at a very high level. We have accessibility teams that kind of just say, hey, this is how we have to do it. We got to start doing accessibility early, we got to shift left and we got to get there, right? But doing those things and saying those things are two different things, right? And so we want to get to a state where we are able to address both these problems. And the way that we do that is working through culture. So what is the ultimate goal, Jessie? Oh, you gotta unmute though.
All right, it had to happen once, so we got that out of there. All right, so like Mark mentioned, we have to move from a culture from accessibility and new processes slow us down to we create content with accessibility in mind. So we have to move accessibility from something that's a nice to have, if we can get to it, a one and done, we fixed accessibility last year, to something that's thought of by developers and teams every single day. So that's where we want to bring accessibility into the day-to-day development of every team. And then by integrating accessibility successfully in the culture and making it something that's thought of more often, will show developers and their business partners that eventually accessibility will not add to their bandwidth. It will not take more time. It'll just be something that's worked in to every feature, every story, every bit of work that the team does. So the way to get there. So we're going to talk about leveling up accessible culture with two main things. So the first one is adapt to each team's current process. So this is where Mark mentioned that accessibility teams tend to get a little caught up in trying to force on teams a one-size-fits-all suggestion and process. Instead, we want to challenge people to look at what's already there and what is already working and build off of that. The next piece is to use incremental building blocks. So pick one small achievable next step and focus with the team on that until the point that it becomes almost second nature. And it is not something that the team is barely even thinking about. It's just something that they do, instead of giving them the entire playbook, which is like overwhelming and setting them up for failure, and they immediately look at it and start giving excuses. So that's where we really want to focus on this Merrill Evans quote of progress over perfection. So we're going to demonstrate this more fully by introducing you to a development team. So today we are following the journey of Team Cyclops. So Team Cyclops is a development team that builds a learning website with multiple learning topics and videos and tracks available to their customers. The team's made up of a product manager, an analyst, 3 React developers, and 1 tester. The team knows what accessibility is, and they think it's too hard. They think that it conflicts with their business priorities and roadmap, and they think that it's unachievable and a moving target.
How dare them? How dare them think that? So adding some more pieces to this, because we have to get into tech specifics, because this would be fun. Now, mind you, this is just an example team. This could be anything. This could be a WordPress team. This could be a content team. This could be, if you want to say it's old school, you can say HTML and JavaScript. I know everybody gets weirded out by that now because HTML and JavaScript's out of style. But for this team, specifically for Team Cyclops, so tech stack is React. They are using a linter that's JSX ESLint. So if everybody doesn't know, a linter is a static code analyzer that analyzes code and checks for issues as you develop. So for instance, if you used an incorrect ARIA role or things like that as you're developing, it can call those things out within a reason. For UI testing, they have two different levels of tests. So they're doing component level testing with React Testing Library, and they're doing UI testing with Cypress, which is cool. So they have integration testing and they have UI or component level testing with React Testing Library. Their release process includes code reviews for each new code change. So they have a senior developer that does code reviews that hits them to their coding standards. And they have a definition of done for each story. That includes a UI testing checklist, right? So your standard look at, hey, does it look and feel the same way as design? Does it function? Does it do the things that we ask, right? 99% sure that definition of done is everything with the mouths, just so everybody knows. So with that being said, let's get into some Mark explaining some dope infographics we're going to end up having on here as we go through. So leveling up steps. So step one to getting us on the right track of creating a developer culture of accessibility is automation. Now, everybody needs to know, the person talking right now, hi, I'm Mark. I'm the biggest advocate for accessibility automation you will find. However, I do know the limitations of it. I do know that accessibility automation only catches a lower third of accessibility issues. And we do know that it's not going to catch everything. However, what is the easiest way to start to get a development team in line and starting to think about accessibility? It is automation. Full stop. That is the way to crack the developer shell and get a foot in the door to start changing that culture, is using automation, number one. So as we go through this and as we go through these leveling up steps, we actually have a little graphic on the side. So right now it's a giant staircase, or I guess we could call it a staircase, a bunch of blocks lined up that look like stairs. At the very top, there's an orange block that says accessibility at every level. At the very bottom right now, where we are, with a little arrow next to it, it says Alley is too hard. So accessibility is too hard right now. That's where our development team is. That's where Team Cyclops is right now. Is it's sitting at development is too hard. So we're at the very bottom of the staircase, okay? So the first step being automation. So automation wise, Jessie talked about this before. For each of these steps, we're going to have two big things we do. We're going to adapt, and we're going to have these small building blocks. The building blocks are the actions, the adaptions are the things that we look at and we get to. Now, the one thing to address before we get into this is everybody, I guarantee, maybe not everybody, but at least most of y'all are probably thinking, Mark, how does this scale? Because this is going to be really difficult to adapt to each thing. It's a great question. And honestly, scaling this isn't as difficult as you think. Most development teams in large organizations, or even smaller organizations too, tend to probably have similar processes, or at least groups of them will have similar processes. So we only end up with adapting for literally a few different types of tech stacks or testing libraries for multiple different groups of development teams. Okay. So for automation, let's adapt. So what's there? Remember we mentioned before, UI testing, they have React Testing Library, and they have Cypress. So we talk to this team and they say, hey, well, most of our testing is actually done at the integration level with Cypress. So we say, hey, awesome, that's great, right? So we know that, hey, you do most of your testing, most of your results come back from your UI testing with Cypress. So awesome. We need to know that. We got it. Thumbs up. For linters, they have JSX ESLint. So we knew that, right? So adapting to what's there, how can we take building blocks off of that? So the first step, we're going to use Cypress within their Cypress regression tests. And what that does is now for the regression test, we have an automated accessibility test in their UI testing regression suite. So now every time it runs, every time they have a pull request, we are now getting accessibility results back to them. It just becomes a part of that UI testing that they have over and over and over, right? And again, we're not changing anything. We're not making a huge wholesale change. We're just adapting to what's there and just doing a small building block to say, hey, start adding accessibility tests into here, right? So that's number one. Number two, the linter that we talked about, JSX ESLint. Guess what? It has accessibility rules. I can tell you right now, if we know we're using React as an example, I can tell you right now for linting tools, almost every single one of them, especially the ESLints, have accessibility rules baked into them. Simply turn them on. Talk to your development teams, turn them on, and get them using it ASAP. Even if it is one single rule, who cares? One rule is better than none. I always give an example. There's an application out in the wild that had 50 different individual issues that were missing images. If they would turn on a linter, they would have fixed that in the one component and 50 issues would have been fixed for one instance of using a linter, right? So adapting to those blocks and using it, now what we have is we have two different levels. We have linting and we have UI testing, and we're giving them the building blocks to run with it. So now if we look at it and we say, hey, Team Cyclops, where are you at? Well, let's say a couple months have gone by, 3 months, 4 months. By the way, this takes as long as it takes. Jessie and I aren't going to sit here and tell you all this takes 2 weeks. Good luck, have fun. No, updating and getting developer culture to evolve to include accessibility takes time. It is what it is, right? What that time is, you can never tell, you can never dictate that time frame. You just have to kind of roll with it and say, we know that we need to do these things. They take as long as they take, right? So during this, just know we're not putting time frames on this whatsoever, but it takes as long as it takes. But let's say a few months go by, okay? Team Cyclops have turned on accessibility linting rules and added Cypress within their Cypress regression tests, and now they're checking automated issues. They're getting results back. That's great. That's the first step. But the team now values accessibility, but they think that they are done. They've implemented automation and they've achieved peak accessibility. I laugh at that every time because I've heard that so many times in my career. They think they've achieved peak accessibility. They're done, right? And I'm sure everybody on this call has heard that same thing. Everybody knows that's a fallacy. Everybody knows that's wrong, right? That's okay. The main thing is that we have them using automation. It's in their specific pieces. It's there ready to go, because this is where we tend to make the mistake. We tend to want to do automation and then some type of enforcement, or like, you got to fix these issues for release beforehand, and teams can't figure it out. They don't even get to the point where they set up their UI tests or their linters because they get caught in kind of a brain freeze where they can't figure out how they're going to do this. So start with automation without enforcement, because guess what? Now we go into code reviews. So if we're looking at the level up piece that's along the way, right? We went from alias too hard. Now we went up 2 steps. And now the arrow is pointing on the step that says we use automation. That's where Team Cyclops is right now. So we need to go up a couple more steps, right? We need to start enforcing it. So keyword from what I said before, you're using automation. We're not trying to run enforcement while we're setting automation up. We're just trying to get them set up. Now we use code reviews to start enforcing some of those automation pieces, but also a couple other things, because code reviews, everybody tends to think that code reviews don't really exist in the world anymore. They sure do. And they are just as strict as they were whenever we started doing code reviews back in the day. They're strict. They are. And we need to know and find a way to get in there and adapt to what's there. So talking about what's there, our code reviews for each new code change, right? So for those who are familiar with GitHub and all the process, it's a PR, but for those not, it's any new code change that gets checked in. They're looking for code quality. That could be specifically any type of code quality standards we have, just looking from a plain coding standpoint, and they're looking for valid HTML. By valid HTML, I'm just making sure everybody's listening on there. Valid HTML does not mean semantic HTML. It just means that it's valid. That's it. Valid HTML can be horrendous. Everybody should know that, right? So what can we do to adapt to what's there and build off of it? So our building blocks now: automation enforcement. Code cannot be merged with linting and UI automation failures. That's number one. Now you can use a multitude of different things. You can use human intervention, or you can use like GitHub Actions to do that, but automation cannot be merged at all. So now we're starting to hit that, hey, we did this step one. Now you cannot do anything without, you cannot merge code without fixing your automated issues, right? But that's not the only thing, because we did say they do code quality and valid HTML. So let's look at semantic HTML usage. The amount of issues that you can fix by someone simply going into a code review and saying, hi, that aria is garbage, use semantic HTML. Oh, it's endless. I'm just telling you all right now. So semantic HTML usage and checking for it is a huge added value in a code review, ensuring that ARIA isn't overused, or if you're using incorrect HTML and we should use semantics that are better for it, right? We can. Just doing those two things in code reviews now brings that enforcement in and now begins to get the team to think, okay, we're going to do this accessibility thing, right? Like I need to do this. So if we look at where Team Cyclops is now, they're checking for semantic HTML and they're enforcing automation pieces from step one. So we've kind of had those, we use the building blocks term for building blocks on top of building blocks, but like we've kind of had those building blocks in place. So now we've went from checking semantic HTML to enforcing automation pieces from step one. So now we're starting to get a little bit more of, hey, this is required. We need to do this, right? It's not just somebody coming down from executive leadership or on the accessibility team saying, you guys got to do this. No, you're starting to see some of the people say, okay, hey, now this makes sense. Like this can fit in. This is easy, right? And now it starts to kind of build itself internally, not just from the accessibility teams. It's starting to build itself up internally of, hey, we can do these things. It's not too difficult. So the team practices accessibility regularly. However, they think that they enforce all necessary accessibility practices now through automation and semantics. Notice a common theme here. Development teams tend to think, we did it, we're done, woo, over and over again during this entire example. But it's the case. They tend to think that they're done with a lot of things. But the thing is, the key is just to keep evolving them and keep pushing them, which we'll get to more. So we're here. We're in step 2. We're starting to enforce it through code reviews, but where can we go next? This is where we kind of get like stuck a little bit, right? So where do we go next? Well, Jessie's going to tell us where we go next because I don't even know.
All right. So now we are further up our staircase. We're about halfway and 2 steps from our ideal, which is accessibility at every level. So we have implemented automation, we've improved code reviews and added enforcement. So next we are going to talk about improving on the team's definition of done. So first of all, a definition of done is an agreed upon set of items that a team must complete before they consider a piece of work done. So we mentioned in our introduction of the team that they have a UI testing checklist. Mark mentioned that it is all mouse oriented. So for our building blocks, we're going to now add some accessibility manual checks to the definition of done that is completed with every set of work. The most important thing here is that we are not adding all manual checks. I mentioned earlier that a really easy mistake to make is to give people the entire playbook, but development teams can't do all of that and keep their velocity or their timeline the same. And again, if you try to give them too much, they'll get overwhelmed, they'll make mistakes, and they'll make excuses. So you might think like the best thing is to give them 20 tests and they can kind of pick and choose which ones to apply based on the situation. They don't really have the knowledge base to do that. So instead, keep it as simple as you can. We can add in just keyboard testing or just visual testing, but not screen reader testing as our first step. The goal is always going to be to add in more steps, but we just want to start with a really small piece until the team gets to the point where they are doing this with every story, where they don't even have to like look at their list. They just know what to look at, and then you continue to build from there. So our final update with Team Cyclops is that we now enforce automation and we run basic manual tests of the product at a regular cadence. We're catching a lot more than we used to. It's a really, really important practice to the team. We're teaching new team members about all these things. The development culture is keeping accessibility at the forefront, but the team thinks that accessibility is only a developer's responsibility. So now we are one step away from our ideal, which is accessibility at every level. And we are sitting at accessible content is what we do. So now what? Where do we go from here? We all know that we're not done. So we illustrated this by calling our next step 4 through infinity. And this is really the long haul. So Mark mentioned, like, we have no idea how long each step is going to take. It's going to vary team to team. We also have no idea how many steps we're going to have to go through, but we can keep using this same framework with whatever we choose to do next. So some examples is like providing more education, focusing on other roles, and the list could go on and on and on. But no matter what's next, we want to stick to the framework of looking at what is there and adapting and picking one small building block.
Yep, right on, because we're going to repeat everything for eternity as a group. So the one thing to know with what Jessie said as well, kind of just to play off of it, is all the steps for step 4 might be step 4 to 4,000. Like, it just depends on what it comes to for as far as setting these things up and going with it, because ultimately picking your next thing is a big process. Like, it's a thought, like, for a developer culture, you can get to a certain extent, but eventually it bleeds into other roles, right? We need other people to come along with us around development team. That's one thing that Jessie and I, as we were building this out, we started to talk through was, when we talk development teams, everybody tends to think it's literally just the developers who sit there and do all the code work, do all the stuff. But in reality, a development team can stretch outside of us really quickly, outside that development team, right? Product owners, scrum masters, right? Designers, all of that phases into a development team. And so when you pick your next thing, you just have to adapt to what's there, assess what is there. Do my developers, scrum masters, quality engineers need education? Like Jessie said, does my quality testing fit into the development lifecycle? Right. So some of those big checklists that Jessie was mentioning, where you just do like simple things for developers, maybe those checklists get larger for QA folks or quality testers to do more, to catch more issues, right? And then once you adapt and see what's there, take the building blocks and build off of that, because there's an opportunity to grow accessibility now to great heights within this. Because the one thing that people tend to do, specifically when it comes to trying to change a culture, is they stop. I'm going to hark back to the very beginning of this entire presentation where Jessie gave the overview of culture. That is the biggest thing that people forget. Culture is not stagnant. It is always evolving. It is always changing, whether it's subtle or not. It is always changing. So taking the time to know what's there and adjusting is the biggest thing for us, is ensuring that we just keep moving that culture and moving that needle to a point where accessibility is involved over and over, and always staying on their toes. It's not, someone brought this up to me before and said, is it keeping developers on their toes? No, that's not what it is. It's just looking for those gaps and finding the next thing and adapting to it as we go, right? So bringing this all home, I always end talks, and everyone says that when I end talks, I have this like gigantic spiel, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna still have a gigantic spiel, so everyone will be fine. But bringing it all home, development team culture is something that is constantly evolving, changing, even though it may not seem like I'm repeating that 1,000 times over, but it is true. It very much is true. But one of the hardest things to crack is the outer shell of a development team. I'm sure everybody on here has been with a development team and has had the not so nice pleasure of trying to crack that outer shell to get to them, to talk about accessibility, all of that, right? Well, taking the time to adapt to see what's there, taking small building blocks can help take that ease off of trying to crack that outer shell, right? Because if I come to you, hey, I was that dev. Hell, Jessie was that dev. We came to it and you say, knock, knock, accessibility, Lego, right? You're going to be like, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, what are you giving me this for, right? Taking the time to figure out your environment, figure out what your development team culture already is and where it's at, what they do, all the process involved, right? We used a quick example here, but taking that time to learn it can help you take that culture to those norms that we talked about, those defined processes, those goals that sits in there and lives for a long time, right? And at the very end of the day, we want to shift the culture of Alley from it is hard to we just give a damn about accessibility. That is what you want at the end of the freaking day. Because too many developers right now don't care, but it's not that they don't care, it's just they don't know. They don't want to do the stuff because it makes life a little bit more difficult and processes come along. And that's not a product of the accessibility groups. It's just a product of business priorities, things like that come in. But we as accessibility advocates and those who work with development teams, we can easily adjust to them to get them to start to give a damn about accessibility when we adapt and use building blocks and shift that culture around. So with that being said, thanks. I'm just kidding. Are there any questions for anybody? From anybody? Oh geez, again, too early in the morning.
Hey, Jessie. Hey, Mark. Thank you so much. This was incredibly interesting on many, many levels, whether you are a developer or not. And I'm not, but I found it so interesting because I work with organizations, helping them shift their culture to accessibility. So these insights were amazing. And we have quite a few really good questions, which is a shame because then mine gets pushed to the bottom. But here we are.
Well, we'll answer them quick so we can get to your speaker. We're good. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's various other ways of interacting with you later. So we'll all get our answers, I'm sure. The first one is from David Denedo. How can plugin developers handle legacy non-accessible code that's already widely used while ensuring backwards compatibility? This is going to be so interesting for so many of us.
Ooh, all right. So
yeah,
number one, that is a loaded question. So I'm gonna break it down two ways. Number one, how you can handle legacy non-accessible code. Okay. So especially for plugin developers, I get it. Like there is a ton of legacy code out there. It is very difficult to be able to handle and or switch teams to be able to fix those issues as well. I will I'll have Jessie if Jessie has any thoughts on this too, but I will make a controversial statement. And if anybody's listening who has heard me say this before, will probably find me after this talk's done and be like, quit saying that. Number one, there is ways to deal with legacy code if it's code that is untouchable, meaning like, hey, it's not worth our time or anybody else's time to like touch it or go through it, right? You can just actually add in a simple JavaScript file to fix some of the issues. Yes, I know everyone's going to say that's not killing at the source. However, if you can't touch that source and they won't let you, you can actually use JavaScript to go back through and fix a bulk of the issues and just have that file there and live so you don't have to go back and retrofit the old components themselves. That is one way. That is ways I've seen people do it before because they can't touch that code, like can't touch the actual markup code, and they have to find a way to get in there and do that. It is not, so everybody knows that is not an overlay. It is specific for that fix and in specific for that HTML to fix. So there's that. It does deal with backwards compatibility. However, when it comes to some legacy code from accessibility side of things is backwards compatibility, it gets real tough real quick. JavaScript fixing wise does cover that a little bit, but like not really. So ensuring backwards compatibility can get really tough. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm gonna struggle for an answer on backwards compatibility pieces. But as far as legacy non-accessible code, like for plugins, that's one way to do it. I mean, that's really the way that I would say to do it and to deal with it. Unless Jessie, you had other thoughts on that. I hope that answers the question, David. I know I'm kind of like roundabouting with it a little bit, but like that is a tough question, especially at 5:40 in the morning. I'm just kidding. But I'm happy to talk more on it too outside of this as well. on what we can do.
Jessie, any thoughts on this very hard question at any time of the day or night, I may add?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I think just keeping in mind too that like any small improvement is helpful, and we're not aiming for perfection,
Yeah.
especially with legacy code. 'Cause, I mean, never, but especially when there's barriers and difficulties, like any little bit helps.
Yeah, very good point. And documenting what you do as well helps a lot, even with possible legal issues. That's the main thing. And then we have another, because we have quite a few questions. And the next one is by Anna Grieve, who says, I'm working with a relatively small and new dev team, so we don't have much in place with things like automation tools and code review. Where do you suggest we start? Another good one.
Yeah, that is a really good one. So, Jessie, I'm sure you have thoughts on this. So if you want to go first, you can.
I mean, I was gonna say, I think that all three of the steps that we went through today in detail are really good starting points.
Yep. Now, for a small team that doesn't have automation tools or like code reviews, you can still, so to Jessie's point, you can still use those same steps. So hear me out. Instead of automation like the UI testing and linters, use a browser extension. So you can use an Axe browser extension, you could use Lighthouse, anything like that, because those same things that we're talking about, where I use automation, I have developers check stuff as I go, right? You can have them check things. We're not enforcing it. We go to step 2 with a code review, not a code review, but like, hey, you can set steps in play to say, hey, I want you to check with Axe, right? Or Wave or whatever it is, and make sure there's no issues before that. I would start there, especially with teams that are newer to things. Sometimes there are teams, full disclosure, that have no UI testing or linting pieces or any processes in place, new or not. So go to the browser extensions right away. The one thing I'll say is be consistent in what you use. Don't cross over different browser extensions. Use one and stick to it, so you all are talking apples to apples and not apples to bananas, as I tell my son when he tells me things that don't make sense. So that's where I would start though with that is using an extension and kind of use the steps like Jessie said. You can still use those steps and use them along the way. You just kind of have to retrofit it then with using an extension instead of using like code reviews and automated accessibility tools like Axe, like in dev pipeline.
Yeah, Jessie, you happy? Do you have anything to add? Good. I'm fascinated that you recommend using just one extension. That's very interesting. But we have too many questions. So the next question is from Isla. Do laws ever come into the conversation, not to scare your team, but how to stay consistent in a world where nation states at different stages and different editions of WCAG? And I think that your company doesn't. It's a very US specific, but in a lot of cases, there's also Europe and Asia and Australia to take into account. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can say the accessibility team. So like normally when we work with different companies, not just ours, like we look at all the different workings as far as like where things are going with WCAG, where stuff going with federal laws, where things going with the European Accessibility Act, like all the different things across the board to see if it affects that. The answer is, do laws come into the conversation? Short and sweet, I'll say yes. If it comes down to it, it's people not understanding why you're doing what you're doing. That kind of comes into the education piece of it, which wasn't in this specifically, but it does come down to that to understand, hey, this is why we're doing what we're doing, right? Normally I don't go that route very bluntly. I try to stick to like, we're doing this for the users, we're doing this to make our content more accessible. However, you always get people that come to the fold of like, yeah, but like, is there a legal reason? And then you kind of have to take the gavel down and go, yes, and explain all the different pieces that are on there. But you are correct. This is why we kind of said the last step piece that Jessie was talking about in this, like the constantly changing and evolving piece. That's part of that. So a step could be, hey, this European Accessibility Act's coming into play, and we need to make sure we do this, this, and this, right? Let's make this a step as we start evolving that culture, so everybody's aware that these things are coming down the pipe, right? And it's going to happen. So, and just that's kind of how we deal with it. We don't like wholesale be like, yeah, you know, here comes WCAG 2.2, good luck, right? Like, no, we got, hey, this is coming down the pipe, so everybody knows here's going to be our requirements. We're going to do this in a few years, right? So, like, know that yes, but at the end of the day, I don't personally try to go to the scare tactic until someone starts to ask the question, like, why are we like legally, why are we doing this, right? Normally, we try to go from the user standpoint.
I have to say that as someone who works independently, I totally agree with you. If anything, usually I would go with like the business opportunity. That's the best way to go about it. But
Yeah.
I have to say that I'm so thankful for things like the EAA, the European Accessibility Act, because a lot of companies are really now going, right, okay, now we need to do it. So that's brilliant. You know, so in a way, yes, and being, you know, it's never a good thing to be scaremongering, but it's good that legislation is happening. Now we have another really good question from Rosita Rampetap. And she asks, they ask, how do you deal with accessibility costs a lot of money, or people with disabilities aren't our audience kind of questions, kind of, you know, counter arguments. As a developer with a disability, I hear that often.
Frio, do you want to take a stab at it?
I mean, I assume that the costs a lot of money kind of gets at the same thing that we were talking about with, like, it takes so much time and effort, and like we have to go back and redo all our code. So I do think that trying to like integrate into the culture combats the money argument at least a little, unless I'm completely missing something from that perspective. I mean, I think in terms of like target audience, it's what we just talked about with like there is a business case. Like if they're not your target audience, maybe they should be.
Yep. So I'll add to what you just said. So here's how I do it. If somebody gives me that piece, so usually the fallacy that runs into is everybody thinks that when we talk accessibility, it's only screen reader users. So what I tend to do is bring it down to everybody else's level. So the first thing I did a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I'm just kidding. I had to get my Star Wars reference in. I'm a Star Wars super fan. But what I did a long time ago was the first time we started talking about accessibility at one of my older companies. It was the same argument of it costs a lot of money. We don't want to do that. And I said, that's awesome. How old are your average user base? And they said, getting into their 50s. Said, awesome. They're not getting any younger. I bet you eyesight's going. Bet you that they're starting to use different assistive technologies in their phone. I bet you use different assistive technologies in your phone. Do you not? So do you want to keep that millions of dollars that they have in your organization, or do you want them to go, well, this company doesn't care about me, I'm out? And bring it to their level to understand at a high level, it's not just like screen reader users. It's not just like it's everybody with it. You're making products holistically accessible for everyone, right? And then it starts to just click a little bit more. And I've had a lot more success saying it that way and bringing it to that level that way than, because again, it just immediately just goes to like, oh, this, what Jessie said, oh, it's going to cost a ton of money. Oh my gosh, we have to do all this legacy code stuff. When you start to bring it into terms that they somewhat understand, when I say they, like whoever is the one who's bringing up like it costs money, all that, when you bring it down to their level and bring it down to their terms that they understand, it tends to stick a little bit more. It's like why we're doing this.
Yeah, and I just like to remind everyone how we're only ever temporarily abled. And I'll move on to the next question, but that was so many good points. Thank you so much. Someone is asking, what resources, tools, or training have you found most helpful in making accessibility a natural part of the development process? We've got like 1 minute to answer this question.
I'm gonna turn this one to Jessie because Jessie is newer to the accessibility field. So I'll ask you if there's resources and things that you had that you would suggest, Jessie.
I don't
If you
know if
can't
I
think of the
do.
top of your head, it's okay.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, I can think of like authoring practice guides for like specific examples, but I don't know for like I don't know where I got the more broad knowledge.
A hosh posh of stuff. There's always one on the top of my mind. I don't know who asked that question. Oh, it says anonymous attendee. It's okay. If that person knows us, you can find us on LinkedIn. You can ask us. It's one of those questions where like I got resources. Just one of those things where I have to look and be like, oh yeah, that. There is one. There's web.dev has an accessibility course that's really good if you're trying to get like education pieces just for like development practices for like getting that in there. There's that. Um, that's a really good training resource for it. And then tools wise, um, if you're looking for tools, I'm just going to say anything that is Axe based is probably the way to go. Just behind the scenes, just because Axe Core is used consistently in a bunch of different extensions like Lighthouse, Insights, things like that is like a core base. So if you're going to do that, that'd be a good tool to go with. And if you want more resources, find me and Jessie on LinkedIn because I can't think off the top of my head past that either.
Yeah. It's
So
probably too long to answer when you have 1 minute. And that's all we have time for. Thank you so much to Jessie and Mark. And thanks for everyone for attending this session. And like Mark and Jessie said, you can continue a conversation with them, finding them on social media. Also reminding you of our hashtags, WPA 11Y day, making sure you use the camel case, and WPAD 2024. You can also go to 2024.wpaccessibility.day/feedback to provide feedback and maybe win the amazing focus is a feature, not a bug t-shirt. And also stay tuned for the next session coming up, which is how to juggle different teams at different places in their accessibility journey. So a perfect segue to the current one with Lorna Notch and Lorenzo Milani. And also, why not make sure that you go and visit our sponsors pages to grab the virtual swag and also enter for a chance to win more prizes. But before you go, please let me thank our live captioning people and our sign language interpreters because they do an amazing job. Having said all this, that was quite a mouthful. I will see you at the top of the hour for the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you to WordPress Accessibility Day 2024 sponsors. Platinum sponsor 20i. Easily build, deploy, and manage all your projects with 20i managed WordPress hosting. One UI for all your servers, apps, sites, databases, security, DNS, and email. Perfect for agencies, e-commerce, developers, multi-site hosting, and high-traffic sites. Platinum sponsor Equalize Digital. Since all they do is accessibility, every post on their blog is an accessibility resource. You can find webinar recordings, articles, and additional resources at equalizedigital.com/resources. Platinum sponsor WP Engine. WP Engine provides the most relied upon and trusted WordPress products for businesses, brands, and agencies of all sizes. Thanks to our gold sponsors, GoDaddy, Grackle Docs, Gravity Forms, Green Geeks, TPGI, and Yoast. And thank you to our silver sponsors, CodeGeek, Drake Cooper, Elementor, Overnight Website, Pressable, Second Melody, and Accessibility Collective.